available today, not to the average consumer, but technologically is available today, would take 45 seconds.
All right, before takeoff checklist, autopilot.
Test.
Most Americans can't get high-speed fiber connections like that. But at some schools, for instance, like the pilot training program at Utah Valley State College, you can experience internet speeds 10 to 20 times faster than what's available in most U.S. homes.
100 above.
100.
And runway is in sight.
Runway in sight.
If you had a connection like this, you could learn to fly, study a foreign language, tutor a child, or mentor a student online. Fiber optic networks could revolutionize how we learn.
They could also change our democracy for the better. For example, you could go online to participate in a town council meeting, not just listening and watching high-quality video, but actually participating, joining in, asking questions, so that everybody who's actually at the meeting could see and hear you.
In Asia and across Europe, governments and private firms have already started using fiber to connect homes to that information superhighway. And the price is right. While most Americans pay around $40 a month to connect over old-fashioned copper wire, which runs at about 1 megabit per second.
In Korea and Japan, you can get 100 megabit services in both directions for about $40.
That's 100 times as fast for the same price. The U.S. had a chance to start building internet connections like that back in the early 1990s.
It was actually, Al Gore may not have invented the internet, but he really was a proselytizer for new fiber optic networks. That was 1992, 93 timeframe. And essentially, all the phone companies then basically said, we'll step up to the plate and we'll do this wiring plan. None of it ever happened.
Kushnick and his colleague Tom Allibone are telecommunications muckrakers who call themselves Teletruth. They're in the process of filing lawsuits against several regional phone companies. They allege that the Baby Bells promised fiber optic connections nationwide, but didn't deliver.
By the year 2006, our research shows that 86 million households should have been wired with fiber, i.e. the majority of the United States. Had they had just kept the eye on the ball and done this work, America would not be in the situation we are in today, which is inferior services for high costs.
Why didn't the network get built? I mean, they made all these promises. It sounded like it really was the information superhighway that we heard about in the 90s. Why didn't it get built?
The reason why it didn't get built is because none of the regulators stepped up to the plate and held the phone companies accountable.
Phone companies are regulated in part by the states. Kushnick and Allibone say that back in the 90s, the phone companies made an offer. They'd invest billions to build fiber optic networks if states let them take large tax deductions and raise the price of basic services.
Call waiting, call forwarding, caller ID cost about a penny to offer. They charge $5.30. All of that is profit now. Under the old regime, they would have to return all of the extra money. They wouldn't be allowed to keep these profits.
Under the old regulations, the phone companies were required to pour those profits back into their networks. In other words, to keep improving their infrastructure.
Phone companies historically were regulated as a public utility, and the format or the type of accounting system that was utilized in the public utility industry was something called rate of return. One of the reasons or ways to promote competition was to do away with rate of return regulations and give the phone companies the ability to make unlimited profits. That's really what it was all about.
You ask people, did I ever pay for a fiber optic network? They go, well, I don't know. And the answer is, well, you paid for it, you don't even remember it. And the regulators, even though it's on the books, a lot of the regulators, I hate to say this, but basically they're too close and cozy with the phone companies.
The regulators he's talking about are state utility commissioners. They were supposed to make sure the phone companies kept their promise to connect millions of Americans to the information superhighway at 45 megabits per second. In New Jersey, for example, the phone company promised 5 million of those connections by last year.
Right now, today, how many homes in New Jersey actually can get this kind of 45 megabit service?
Well, actually, zero. I mean, nobody can get 45 megabit. It doesn't exist. I mean, it's absolutely zero. The only thing that comes close is in a commercial type of environment, for very specialized types of applications. But there's no such thing in a residential consumer marketplace.
According to Teletruth, phone companies took $25 billion in tax write-offs, while revenues soared 128%. But they didn't build the fiber network they promised.
So with all this cash cow, what do you do with the money? They should have said, why don't we build the best network we can, and therefore it'll basically, the infrastructure, and basically make our infrastructure the best in the world. And they didn't do that. They basically took the money and ran.
When we began our reporting, my colleagues Peter Bull and Rick Carr wanted to call this story David versus Goliath. They were struck by the fact that after the phone companies failed to build the information superhighway they had promised, several towns and cities across the country took matters into their own hands and decided to build their own fiber optic networks. That has landed almost every one of them in a David versus Goliath battle, as phone and cable giants push back, determined to outlaw what they call unfair competition from municipalities. For a case study, Peter and Rick traveled to Lafayette, Louisiana, the heart of Cajun country.
We have an out-migration problem with our young people from Louisiana, and I felt it was time for politicians to quit talking and do something.
Something like building every home and business in town its own fiber optic connection to the information superhighway.
We see telecommunications in the way of internet, in the way of fiber connectivity, as something that should be available to everyone.
Just like water, sewer, electricity, telephone. I mean, it all falls into that same lump.
I think this is a tremendous opportunity for small business and to attract business here.
Lafayette's phone company, Bell South, and its cable company, Cox Communications, told residents that they'd have to wait a decade or longer for better internet connections, like the ones they take for granted in Tokyo.
Up until recently, the majority of the parish only had one-way communication on their cable, so they could download information. However, but to be able to send any information, they had to be able to connect through a phone modem.
If we didn't do it, this community would not get it for 20 or 30 years. Who knows? And what's your name?
Joey Durrell is the city parish president of Lafayette. He calls himself a progressive Republican who sees no reason why local government shouldn't provide services that the private sector won't.
You know, there are things that are going to be available 3 or 4 or 5 years from now that nobody has even thought about yet. And that's going to happen. And Lafayette will be uniquely positioned to take advantage of that, unlike most of the country.
So what the city decided to do was build its own fiber network through its municipal power and water company, Lafayette Utility Systems, or LUS. Terry Huval is the utilities director.
A lot of people think of the internet as being sort of the triumph of the marketplace, the triumph of entrepreneurship. Why would a public utility need to get involved with the internet?
The community wanted to have competitive options for telephone and mainly cable television service. Cable television service drove us even to look at this because people were so dissatisfied with the cable TV company continually going up on their rates.
When the city-owned utility started to build its own small fiber network, looping around town to link up its generators, substations, and offices, Huval had an aha moment.
That's what created the vision of saying we can do something special for our community, for the people that own this utility system.
He realized that LUS could extend the network to every home and business in town and provide better internet service at a lower price if the city could raise $125 million by selling bonds.
We said, guys, come on.
Some residents launched a grassroots campaign to support the community fiber plan. They called themselves Lafayette Coming Together, and they got together at a local restaurant to tell us about their unusual coalition.
I'll repeat this till the day I die. Can't nobody else compete against corporate America but government. And when I saw the government willing to take a stand in regards to helping the people of this community, I said, I'm getting on board this train.
We have a mix in this room of Democrats and Republicans. I'm definitely on the conservative side. This is not a traditional place for conservatives or Republicans to be.
Last time we were here, somebody made an analogy to roads and said, you know, we expect that the government is going to build roads because that's essential to commerce, and this is akin to that.
That's another reason I think conservatives have been able to come over to support this effort. It's infrastructure, and that's one of the things that we look to our government to provide.
the big thing for us is realizing that the future of